Hi, everyone. This is Max. I'm in Berlin, and I'm joined today by everyone from the European time zone meetup, folks from all around the world, not just in Europe, but we are meeting on European time, hence the name. And one day we might come up with a better name, but this is suitable for now. Today we'll be doing a collaborative close reading of Rosemarie Waldrop's poem, Memory Tree. I will start by reading the poem, which is a bit long, and then we'll start riffing on it. Here goes. Memory Tree by Rosemarie Waldrop. And secondly, in German. My first school day, September 1941, a cool day. Time did not pass, but was conducted to the brain. I was taught the Nazi salute, the flute. How firmly entrenched the ancient theory. Already using paper, pen, and ink. Yes, I said, I'm here. I was 6 or 7 dwarfs. The snow was white. The prince at war. Hitler on the radio, followed by Lehar. Senses impinged on. Blackouts, sirens, mattresses on the floor. Furtive visitor or ghost. And mother furious. Sirens, hiss. The cat. My sister cried unseen. Her friend, afraid to look. What did I know of labor, force, or pregnant? The deep interiors of the body. I had learned to ride a bike. The black cat, the white snow, the blue flower, a menace of a different color, uniform movement with unsurpassed speed, not fastidious, not necessary for substance to be filled in deep inside. Mother, I cried extremely, and wolf, exceeding the snow I was at home in, wool pulled over my eyes. Oh, wolf, the boy who did not cry also died. Twilight overtures. Face fair, black hair, hands parsimoniously on knees, a Polish girl. In Germany? In the war? Moving along swiftly in the air between us, a continuous image. Enough of black cat panic, bells, shells, of sirens, hiss of bombs. A long life of learning the preceding chapter, that my soul in blue jeans, my mother in childbirth, my rabble of hopes in German, east of expectation, west of still waiting, in bed with an antidote, eating of the tree, leaves falling before the fall, through a hole in memory. The fruit puckers new problems, but doesn't quench the orchard long abandoned. Whew. So there's a lot to talk about. And I think it's always best when we're dealing with a long poem. And this is not terribly long, but it's hefty. When dealing with a poem like this, to start at the beginning. So Memory Tree, and secondly, in German. Let's start with the title that's offered here, Memory Tree. What is a memory tree? Does anybody want to give a gloss of this title, Memory Tree? We know about family trees. We know about, memory tree doesn't strike me as a crazy concept or anything. It's kind of familiar. But does anybody want to say something about what a memory tree might be?
I think that it might be partly that it was very hard to think about these memories, and that in a way, I mean, she didn't write this until, what would she have been, 70 or so?
Yeah.
I know you said start at the beginning, but a long life of learning the preceding chapter. For me, the idea of the tree here is that it's had to grow slowly. It's had to digest all these things. It's had to put out all the branches and the leaves and find some way with dealing with all this stuff. Because as you get older, because I'm that kind of age now, stuff that you've managed to ignore all your life comes at you a bit. And so for me, a tree feels like a really good way of dealing with stuff, of sorting it out, of letting it grow, of seeing it differently, renewing it.
And a tree, that's nice, Jenny. And a tree also takes a long time to grow, right? I think that's sort of embedded in what you're saying, that there's this process of letting this thing come into being these memories of this actually very difficult time that are decades in the past for her by the time she's writing this. I think it's interesting that you also cued us into that penultimate stanza, Long Life of Learning, the preceding chapter, and how for you that's very close to, or there's something about that feels beginning like or something, right? Since you said, since you kind of went there, it's like the kind of moments to point to as part of thinking about what the memory tree might be. Any other comments? Anybody else want to? Kat?
Yeah, I think that it's also that the tree has many branches, like the memory that can go off in many tangents.
Sure.
So
yeah, there's a kind of a sort of a branching shape. Joy, did you want to add something? Oh, Joy, you're on mute, Joy.
I pretty much had the same one about many branches.
Yeah, the branches, and of course trees also have roots, and that's why and trunk, right? So trees always provide this very compelling shape for thinking about relationships, which is why we speak of family trees, of course. Stanley?
Yeah, I just got that. Since she said she wrote it when she was 70, well, she lived through all those things, and so we're looking at it through that looking glass of having lived through those things.
Right, yeah. So she's right. These are memories that she's lived, and then she's come many years from that point. By the time she's writing this, and by the time she's like assembling this tree, or I mean, I guess we could talk about what exactly she's doing that it feels tree-like here. We've talked a little bit about, the branches of memory and stuff. I mean, is she kind of, is she letting the tree grow, as Jenny suggested, or is she doing something else? Anybody want to?
One of the things I find so interesting is that what Jenny said before, the tree, but the nutrients are all those bits and pieces of stuff, like the Hungarian musician on the radio, Hitler on the radio, or the nursery rhymes, the biblical references. All those are not what she lived exactly, but what fed her, the nutrients for her memory. And the tree takes up nutrients from the earth and from the air and from the light. So I think it's really an interesting thing that Jenny brought up.
That's a really good point. Yeah, like there's these sorts of collisions of memories, right? This is clearly not. She's not setting out the facts of what happens to her in 1941 in Germany. She's combining facts with other non-fact like things in order to produce something that is kind of like closer to memory maybe than a text than a history, say, right? This is not a history of what happened in September of 1941. This is a memory tree of what happened. And so Mary, you're talking about or you were adding to what Jenny said, kind of about this poem maybe being a tree, kind of coming into being, growing as a tree. But I wonder if there's any other way of understanding the tree. Caroline, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I agree with you. It's not a history, but one does get a sense of her wanting to bear witness to how it felt to be a child in 1941. And she's not approaching it directly. She's coming in slantways with the fairy tales and everything. But I do, and memory tree feels almost like it's a compound word, like German has compound words. I don't think it is, but there is a kind of a memorial sense to the poem to me as well.
That's the idea of a memorial is interesting. Sure, Nancy, did you were you chiming in a second ago?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I feel like she starts at the beginning, my first school day, and then she branches out. Like the moments they branch out, and that it does feel tree-like. And then she like goes out, and then she comes back in the end, like she does her whole tree all around, and then she comes back in the end with a long life of learning, and she kind of like brings it all in and buries her roots again. And I liked it a lot.
Mark, did you have something to?
Yes, I would like to get back to the tree. To me, the tree is such a wonderful image. I agree that it stands for something that grows, that develops. She develops. She talks about her development through school, a long life of learning, as she puts that. That's one idea. Then the tree also resembles something that is stable. It has roots, it has stem, the branches. That could be history, her past, what she remembers. And yet a tree also is a bit unstable. When wind comes, when a storm comes, then it changes its form. And I think that's what's also going on in the poem, that like these leaves of the tree, they hide something, then they reveal something again, and that is also what's going on in the poem.
Super.
Yes. Kat, did you want to chime in a second ago? Okay, you're on mute.
I just wanted to say that I Googled it, and there is actually a memory tree. It's used in memorial services, and people hang notes from the branches saying something about the deceased. And it's very like the poem, like each stanza or phrase is like a note, noting something from the memory.
Yeah. And I think that's I think that there's a long history of trees being used in this kind of like ritualistic or memorial way. I mean, the contemporary Christmas tree is also a tree that people hang things on, and that the shape of the tree allows itself for this kind of, let's say, sort of not decentralized practice of thinking or memorializing or something like that. So what you're describing, Catherine, is this kind of funereal memory tree where people hang notes. I mean, the tree has all these branches, so you can kind of put things on there, and that way you have this kind of collected mass of remembrances that doesn't. It's not a narrative, right? It's not like okay, everybody, put your memories together of this person, and we'll put them together in a book, and that way, there's going to be like the first memory and the last memory or something like that, which is a very different way of organizing memory and information than, say, like hanging stuff on a tree. I think that I want to go back to what Mark and Nancy were saying a second ago about the tree. So each of you have kind of given given some good ways of thinking about this poem as a tree. And Mark, you started talking about how it's a tree not just because it's a kind of branching off of memories or relationships, but also because things seem to happen to it, and trees are always like affected by the wind, or sometimes they're struck down. And so I wanted to ask, like, what do we think Rosmarie? I guess we've already talked about how this poem is tree-like, but what is she doing to this poem that's tree-like? So is she letting it grow the way that Jenny, Mary, and I think, the way that Jenny and Mary, you started saying? I mean, is she kind of like outlining it, as Nancy, you started to say? Is she is she just maybe trying to get different impressions of it as it changes in the wind and the sunshine, as Mark, you were starting to say? Or is she? What are the other things that we can do to trees, and do they help us think about what this poem is doing? Mary.
Yeah. Well, the funny part I thought is a memory tree. Everybody's contribution really interesting, but it's a tree growing. Well, it's not really a tree. It's like a mixed bag of stuff. Again, my word, stuff, but her stuff. It's like a mixed bag, really, and it doesn't grow organically. It doesn't seem to grow organically. It seems to be hodgepodge. You see, although she uses the word tree, which is an organic marvel.
Right.
It's a strange use. I would put memory dream is what she's really talking about, a dream here, which a dream is often hallucinatory or strange.
Right.
And a tree is not really hallucinatory or strange. It's usually very organized.
Right. And which I think it starts to get at the question I asked. That's the useful way of getting at that question, I think, which is, so there are moments in this poem that seem to maybe complicate the idea that this is a kind of organic sprouting up of memory or something like that, right? Which is what I think Tree invites us to understand at first. I mean, I wonder, is there a way of understanding this poem as like pruning the tree of memory, or landscaping it in some way, chopping it down, hollowing it out, turning it into firewood or something? And there's so many things that people do to trees. So I'm just wondering if there's, if we see that kind of, maybe perhaps a more active role for Rosmarie in this poem than say watering the tree and letting it grow. Is there more that's going on?
You can link the word memory tree to a different concept like family tree. And this is a way I think she uses that as a title, I mean, if you compare memory tree, family tree. So there are concepts that are meant to be named, right? And the other thing is that it's a title, and then it has a subtitle, and secondly in German. So I think we should not see how much tree we find in the poem, but see what function that title has for the whole poem. And also look at this title, this memory title, as a concept that she tries to apply to the whole poem. And then it changes our view of I mean, we are kind of limiting ourselves to the organic physical tree, but in conjunction with memory, it becomes something completely different. And that's what I'm trying to explore in the poem. And I might want to add that, well, how many chapters are in this short poem? Because at the end, she says, a long life of learning the preceding chapter. So the dream, how we named it, of what she's laying out, maybe only one memory that is so condensed in the main part of the poem is called one chapter, and that in relation to the title and the subtitle. So I would like to explore that more than being kind of confined to that. What does a tree
Sure.
Concept of the tree do to the poem?
Great. And then, so maybe let's start diving into the poem, and then my question maybe reemerges later as we're talking about the mechanics. Mark, is there something you want to add?
Yes. In the poem itself, there's, I believe, only one phrase where the tree comes up, and that's eating of the tree, where she relates the memory tree to her Jewish tradition, as it is an allusion to Genesis. It's the tree of knowledge, eating of the tree, leaves falling before the fall, the fall of man. That's what she refers to. Next, she also talks about fairy tales, and conventionally fairy tales are set in the woods, and there are several trees, and so this is her memory tree from these fairy tales.
Right, that's a good observation about the occurrence of the tree at the end, and also the oblique reference to trees, of course, through the many references to fairy tales, which, of course, fairy tales seem to be very important to this poem because of the the kind of educational function that fairy tales have. You know, as folklore, they relate something about kind of usually some sort of shared past or tradition, and also they tend to teach lessons for the future.
And of course, her age. And of course, her age. She's
Right.
a schoolgirl.
A little girl.
What do schoolgirls read? They read fairy tales.
Sure. Especially in 1941.
Yes.
Is that you? Yeah.
About your question, it seems that now that I read the last paragraph, it's like actually she's consuming the tree, not watering it, but yes, eventually destroying it.
That's right. That's what that paragraph suggests. Yeah, that she's eating of the tree of knowledge, right? And which of course is, as you know, Mark was reminding us, is the original sin. Mary, did you have something to add? Were you chiming in?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I was just thinking that the tree of knowledge, I thought of a joke. I saw the snake winding around the tree, and Eve says, "Have you washed it?" The apple. She wouldn't eat the apple because the snake had not washed it.
Okay.
And I think that's very interesting because she said the fruit puckers. It's not edible. It's not available to eat. It presents new problems, and it doesn't quench your thirst either. Having this knowledge doesn't quench your thirst, and so the orchard has been abandoned. All this beautiful garden has been abandoned, and where does that leave her? And that's it.
I love this line: the fruit puckers new problems, but doesn't quench. I think that's so that's so crucial, and I think that we're so far, as we've been dipping our toes into this poem, we've been going to this last section that comes after this asterisk, which is, you know, these last two stanzas are set off from the preceding chapter, as it were. So maybe we want to talk a little bit about what these, you know, by way of kind of coming through the poem in a sort of circle or at a different angle, talk about what these two paragraphs are doing that are offset at the end here by this asterisk. The one about the preceding chapter, and then the one about the tree, and maybe why those are we're talking about those first as guides to the rest of the poem, or why they feel so important to thinking about the idea of the memory tree to begin with. So Mark already talked to us, or already, you know, brought to our attention a little bit about the reference to the tree, and Suzanne, I think you were talking a bit about the preceding chapter here and what that means for the poem. But does anybody else want to talk about these last two stanzas, and why are they set off by an asterisk? What are they doing here? What is their relationship to the poem? Nancy, did you?
Yeah, I think the asterisk sets off the past with the present. And I think that I feel like she's sitting there and she's written all of these memories down, and she's all of these little leaves of memory. She's put them down and arranged them into a tree. And she, for her, that's eating of the tree. This writing down of her memories. It's the eating of the tree. And the leaves are falling before the fall, meaning she's giving her memories here before she isn't here anymore to give those memories forward. And through the whole of the memory, through a hole and into memory, the fruit puckers new problems but doesn't quench. There's things she doesn't remember exactly right. And she's not sure what's there and what's not there. And then she realizes that the orchard is long abandoned, that's way back in the past, and this is her present now. And I could imagine her writing that last, the orchard long abandoned, and then standing up and walking away from her desk. Poem finished.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
That's such an interesting.
Really good.
Mark, do you want to add something here before?
Yes. The first thing I noticed was the asterisk, and it is so reminiscent of Jewish poetry, psalms. They are also written in the same tradition. You have two verses that are split up with an asterisk, which means a pause, and also here the asterisk is the pause. You have a parallel structure in psalms. It starts with one idea, and then it continues with that idea. It can be the same idea, it can be the opposite. And here it is about learning, it is about education. It starts with her first school days and all her associations. Then you have the pause, and then that verse continues with a long life of learning. She continues talking about learning, and she relates that to Adam and Eve, the tree of knowledge. They also learned something. They learned that they were nude, and what was going on around them. And talking about psalms, that is Jewish poetry. And what do we have here? It's also a poem in a Jewish tradition.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's I kind of want to triangulate your two observations, Nancy and Mark, into like a new line of inquiry. So Nancy, you're to recap what you were saying, there's this this depletion of memory that's taking place over this poem, because if we understand as being in the present, at the end she's saying, you know, she sat down to like go to the orchard of memory, and then she gets there, and while she clearly has a lot to write about, the end, the fruit is sour, it makes her thirsty, and the orchards are abandoned. There's nothing really to eat anymore. Anyway, she kind of eats it, and then it's gone, it's done, and then what else is there to do? Which is an interesting way to think about memory, especially a project like this. And then Mark, you're talking about Psalms and a Jewish poetic tradition, which is if we talk about the actual historical context of what this poem is about, is that's a complicated and fascinating move for her to make. So I kind of want to talk, I guess, I want to use both of your comments as a way into the memories she's actually writing about. And so what does it mean to be writing about this, life in Nazi Germany with this psalm structure? And also, is there something about these memories that makes them so into a kind of abandoned orchard, as Nancy, you pointed out, maybe more so than other kinds of memories? Say, if this poem were about like, I don't know, a trip to San Francisco in the 70s, would it end in the same way? Is this a fundamental quality of remembering that we kind of, we eat of the tree and we pucker and then we abandon the orchard, or does it have something to do with these very specific memories?
I personally think it's a quality of memory, and the further away it gets from you, the more it takes on this quality. You remember, at some point, you just remember yourself remembering. You don't even really necessarily remember the actual thing that's happening to you. That's my quick opinion.
So even if she was not a young woman living in Nazi Germany, but say, she was a young woman living in Indiana or something in the 40s, from this time, with all that time away, it would still be more or less the same effect, because it's just the effect of time and distance. Kat, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, now that we talk about it, it reminds me of an artist, a German artist called Anselm Kiefer. I don't know if you know him. Anyway, he makes these landscapes of trees, like fallen and burnt trees, and dried flowers, and it's all about German memory. And it's very German in a way. I mean, this, because not usually, we can think of memory as something very rich and colorful, but it's the opposite. It's like, burnt or dried memories.
So, they kind of fits with the abandonment of the orchard. Jenny, did you have something to add?
I really like what other people have just been saying, which has given me a new view of it. But I also think that the fact that she was born where she was when she was very specific to this poem. That in a way that perhaps she was driven to write it, because it looks at a time in her history and in German history that was very difficult. And it also, the thing that comes through it, and the thing that she spoke about in the ModPo discussion, was that all the time she never really knew what was going on, that all these things were happening around her and nobody would give her any explanations. And she talks in the poem about wool being pulled over her eyes, and her sister being afraid to look. That the poem is as much as anything about what she doesn't know as it is about what she does know. And the way that she approaches it with the repetitions and the changed repetitions all the way through it, I think hold it together very well. But I would disagree that it's typical of any memory. I think there is something very specific about this particular memory.
That's well, I'm going to bracket that real quick. I'm going to say hi to Denny, who appears to have tuned in. Denny, we're in the middle of discussing Rosmarie Waldrop's memory tree, so I'm going to pull that up real quick. We're chatting about it. You're muted right now, Denny.
Oh yeah, I was trying to get in on my laptop, and for some reason I couldn't.
No worries. I'm glad you're able to tune in.
So I'm on my phone here.
Fantastic.
I'll just mute again. Did you guys start like 5 minutes ago?
We started almost an hour. Well, we took about an hour ago.
well, that's the other thing is that on my computer, I went to my laptop at 7:30 and tried to log in, and it said meeting starts at 8:30, and then so I waited till 8:30, and then it wouldn't let me in.
There must have been a time zone confusion. We can talk about it later when we're finished with the reading, so we can make sure.
Anyways, yeah.
In the meantime, I wanted to go back to Jenny, your comment about how you think this is actually, in fact, very specific to the poem is the style of the poem is very specific to the memories. And Jackie, do you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I hope the knocking doesn't disturb. I was on the same line as what Jenny was saying, because I also heard the ModPo discussion, and she says that it is autobiographical and that she doesn't remember a lot of things, and that she did write it as an adult. And when you do that, you get you get a complete other perspective. I could write about when I was 6 years old, but it would be a memory tree. It would be a confusion of things. In this case, it's a confusion of very terrible things, especially as a memory. In a retrospect, when you see, oh, that's what was going on, that can be quite, that's quite intense. She also said, or somebody else also said, and I'm discovering it every time I read these last two paragraphs, or after the asterisk, you can understand that in so many ways, it's everything can mean so many things that it makes it kind of fascinating, because everybody's answer is right, and yet everybody's answer is different. And that's what, you have to read it 5-6 times before you can say, aha, I think I know. I think I can start to appreciate it's a very difficult poem, especially those last two lines. But there is the woman and says, yes, this is what I remember of all of this. And this is what I have to say. And again, if we go back to this, that's what I have to say. I'm still puzzled completely by the multitude of ways that you can read those last two sections. It starts to make sense in a discussion like this, but she did leave. You know, when you leave in your country and then you have to remember you're in another country trying to communicate these ideas to a new public in a new language. Right. That's a whole a big job for a poet, a bilingual poet, especially, is what I understand she is.
Yeah.
Sorry, who I
Jackie, can I just jump in? I agree with you that you can read it in so many different ways, and everybody has a different way of reading. And I would like to ask the group maybe to feel it out and see what kind of emotions come up when we read the last two passages, because that is a universal way of understanding when we talk about the bilingual of this poem, that she has this experience in German and she writes it in a different language. But the emotions that she conveys are something that we can all feel as readers. And so that would be something for me. For me, there's a little bit of a loss towards the end, that there's nothing that can be resolved, really. And that kind of also echoes with what Mark says about if there's some connotation with the Jewish Psalms, that she's building that into the poem, the tragic of what happened during Nazi Germany. And she builds that into the poem, quite hidden.
It's I think you've posed this a good exercise here, Suzanne, to dive into some of the emotional content of this poem, which there's a lot by nature of what she's talking about. I mean, it's already emotional, as for lots of people when they're older, to be recalling their childhood, and especially the political context in which she grew up here. Should we? Yeah, Mark.
I would like to get back what Janel said, and I agree completely on what Janel said. And maybe I contradict a bit to Susanne's statement. The poem starts my first school day, September 1941. That is where we would probably expect some horrible events, all these terrors that were going on over here in Germany and in Europe, especially on the Eastern Front. But what she remembers, these are beautiful things. She starts with the dwarves taken from fairy tales. Maybe she identifies herself with the dwarf as she is a little schoolgirl. She has the prince. She mentions Franz Leher's operettas. They are also beautiful. Mm-hmm. They are in contrast to what was going on in September 1941. Okay, the wolf, the black cat. She talks about fairy tales. It's such a wonderful world, a wonderful realm that she enters, and she doesn't really confront herself with the terrors that were going on, although they come in when she talks about her mother. She cried. Then that Polish girl, was that?
Mm. That's in the
towards the end of the first stanza, so to speak, yeah. Before the asterisk. A Polish girl in Germany. There all these terrors come in, but actually, what she's talking about, these beautiful things, fairy tales. She talks about Franz Leher and his wonderful music. Janel, you disagree?
Do, because fairy tales are horrific things. Fairy tales are about the horrors in it. And right at the beginning, time did not pass, but was conducted to the brain. I was taught the Nazi salute. Now, I find that horrifying. You're a tiny child on your first day at school. My first day at school was horrible too, but nobody made me do a Nazi salute. Go out into the yard and form up into a thing and do a Nazi salute. She's right at the beginning. She's telling us that this was a difficult time, but what she's doing is she's doing what poets do. She's doing it in a roundabout way. She's contrasting. So she's contrasting the flute and the salute. And then she's saying how firmly entrenched the ancient theories. So entrenched, there's entrenched in your mind, or there's entrenched in a trench in a war. You know, just the whole world, that whole word. For me, we could have just spent this whole hour on that first paragraph and dug a lot out of it. For me, what she's doing as a poet is making us do the work. She's making us make the connections. And she horrified me in that first verse, that thought of that child absolutely horrified me. So for me, it worked.
Yeah.
Fairy tales have a happy ending, so I disagree. I think she escapes into this wonderful fairy tale world. I'm not so sure what she means by the Nazi salute. As I understand that, she doesn't know what is going on, and I can imagine that a whole class is standing in the schoolyard and they are practicing the salute, and it's a sign of community. She belongs to a certain group. She doesn't really understand what it is that they are doing, but everybody is doing it, and she's a member of that group. I think she is fascinated by what is going on, that everybody is doing the same thing. She appreciates her flute lessons. She learned playing the salute.
So before I wade in here, there's a few other hands that have been popping up. So I want to give some folks a chance to respond to what's being said in this conversation right now. Rana, did you see that?
I agree with Jen, because I think the first stanza has a stark lack of agency from her part. It's all passive. So the school is a place where there is a looming presence of an authoritarian figure or an institution. So it's only at the end, the final line, where she proclaims her presence. Yes, I said I'm here. Could be an answer to a roll call or just an affirmation that, okay, I am here. But until that end, the whole of the stanza is about how she was taught and how time was conducted to the brain. So there is that irony of how in a school time is so structured. It comes from one period to the next, to the lunch time, and then it goes. So it's all very structured. So I think it's about how the institution and a particular doctrine takes over your brain. So I feel the tone is rather grim than positive.
Time being conducted to the brain is an intense image. Caroline, I thought I saw your hand float up a second ago.
Yeah, I wanted to come in about the Nazi salute, because I'm kind of changing my mind about what she's very much leaving it to the reader to decide what that's doing in the first stanza, isn't she? Because she's sort of, I was taught the Nazi salute, the flute. So she's sort of slightly underplaying the Nazi salute. She's putting it in the same category as a music lesson, in a sense. But writing this poem as an adult, she knows if you if you put a child in the first day at school being taught the Nazi salute, everyone will go, whoa. So it's kind of ambivalent, isn't it?
It's very ambivalent. Does anybody else want to tune in here on this rather exciting controversy? Suzanne?
Yes, I just wanted to. No, you can go on.
Suzanne and then Yunia.
Just a very brief remark, especially with the Nazi salute and the flute, that she was a really avid flute player herself. So that's something that she really loved and something that she probably really despised, even though she wasn't sure about it when she was little. But then the whole thing is also a reflection from years as she reflects now, she has to write it down as a poet, and this is how she chooses to write it down, with something that was really dear to her heart, the flute, and that's that strange entity that entered her life, the political the Nazi presence.
Yunia?
I have a question here.
Oh, and yeah.
The idea, was how firmly entrenched, comma, the ancient theories. What could that mean? Because she's a child. She's a child here. Why would she say ancient theories?
Let's bracket that for a second, and Yunia, I'll let you chime in real quick since I know you had something to add, and then we can come back to the ancient theories.
It's nothing big. I just wanted to say that I think it's really important to emphasize the confusion that she feels, because I think with all of the, the Nazi salute and everything, and even the ancient theories, it's all very like a firm frame that she is given as a child, and also like all this order that she must feel in her everyday school life, and also like also the fairy tales, they give her this kind of frame through which she can see all of the environment. But at the same time, she is very confused, as you are as a child, because you don't really know who you are. And I think that's really shown in the sentence, I was 6 or 7 dwarfs, which I think can be just seen as an allusion to, Snow White or anything. But she isn't even sure if she's 6 or 7 dwarfs. She doesn't know anything really, but she's confronted with all of those horrible things already.
So if I may make a synthesis of the various comments that have been made. Well, actually, I'm going to rephrase your question about the ancient theories, Mary, as a way of trying to get an account of the various and even diverging readings we've had here of this very first part of this very complex poem. So why would she say something like ancient theories, or to say something like ancient theories begs the question of where is the author here in location or relative to the persona, the speaker of the poem, and the character, let's call her the main character of the poem, Little Rosemary. Where is the author in relation to this person? And so I think we have some folks who are saying, well, the author is back in that time, trying to relate this childlike view of what's going on, right? And almost like a way that doesn't have the same force of judgment that we would expect from somebody writing this poem many years later, right? Like maybe something like the perspective of a little kid in 1941 who's kind of like I don't know that all of this is wrong, right? Like, because I'm a little kid and this is my society. This is just what we do. Or is she close? So is Rosemary the poet, Rosemary the character in the poem, or is Rosemary the poet, her contemporary self, looking back on this time and being like, yeah, and they taught us all of these ancient theories about like how great we were and stuff, but I know that now, right? So when I say stuff like about when I relate the Nazi salute to the flute, or when I talk about Snow White in the context of this, like I'm actually this is a provocation in some ways, right? Caroline, were you saying that? I think talking about like with how that's like a very provocative gesture at the very start of this poem, right? So where is the poet in relationship to her younger self. Is she back? Is she trying to get back there, or is she many years later? Is she somewhere in between? Is she both at the same time? Is she sometimes one, sometimes the other? Yeah.
I think that what she says, that time did not pass but was conducted to the brain, is how she feels. It's like that there is this halt of time, like it's eternal, and she's still there. Maybe. And this thing with the ancient theories, it also connects to that time did not pass. That it's all, yes, that as the Nazis were looking back to the ancient Greeks, for example, they were saying that they're as big as them, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, this eternal time.
Yeah, yeah. Or time being conducted to the brain feels like right, or there's some kind of like teaching of history maybe, or something that's taking place there. I'm sure.
It's like, it's also a bit, this rhythm, the Nazi rhythm, and she's also talking about being taught the flute. So it has to do with this steady rhythm and the steady passing of time as taught, or something like this.
Yeah, I think talking about what's rhythmic in this poem is fascinating, because so much of the poem is about like internal rhymes. I mean, these are things that we can maybe quickly talk about, but we're almost at the end of our hour. We have, we can keep going for a few more minutes, but I want to give some folks some more chance to chime in. Jackie, it looks like you have something to say.
About your question about where is she in this thing? There are sentences that are quote unquote childlike, and then there are sentences that are clearly adult-like. I don't think that a child would say, how firmly entrenched the ancient theories, or what did I know of labor, forced or pregnant. These are adult ideas. Uniform movement, unsurpassed speed, that's an adult writing about things that were. So her voice and her memories, all, the more I'm reading it, the more.
Oh, Jackie, I think you cut out a little bit. Oh no. Okay. Anybody else want to? So Jackie is on the side of Rosemarie. The poet is adult, talking about this time. Caroline.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to say before we get to the end of the hour, really, was the penultimate stanza paragraph before you get to the asterisk, face fair, black hair, that just said Paul Celan to me, and death fugue. See all these other influences coming in, and reading this as well, and hearing her read it, you could hear the German and the English kind of colliding and mixing, because the Nazis salute the flute. That's an English rhyme that she's using there. Right. And I just love the mixture of the two.
Can I suggest that everybody goes and looks at the ModPo broadcast, because Rosemarie talks in it there about some things being true and some things not being true, but she's very specific about the fairy tale element. And the fairy tale element, the Seven Dwarfs and the Snow and the Prince, was to do with a theatre company that was traveling around and was doing a children's show in the day and bringing children in to be the dwarves, and then doing an adult show in the evening. So the very specific Snow White bit was related to a very specific memory of something that happened. And I mean, there may be other reasons for having fairy tales, but that actually was that was a specific event. So
Jenny,
I just have a brief question. Was she one of the dwarves? I think I heard it a long time ago. I don't quite remember it, but if you just heard it recently, was she part of it as a?
No, I
Is this-
don't think she was a dwarf.
Okay.
I think there was a time lapse, but the Snow White thing was a thing that came around immediately after the war, I think, so not in the same year as Owen. But anybody else who watched it can correct me, but that's what I remember.
I think she was one of the dwarfs, I think. I mean, I watched it yesterday. So. And it happened after the war. Yes, that's true.
So what gets oh, sorry, Rana, did you have any?
No, I'm done. I'm
sorry, I
done.
didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I'm done. Yes.
So part of what gets revealed, I guess, is, I mean, what you're referring to the broadcast there, which I can share the link for. So part of what gets revealed, I mean, at least when you have the chance to ask the poet, so like, what is all this stuff about? The poet says, well, it's about a bunch of different things. Some of these, these are, I've kind of coded these memories in certain ways, but not all of them belong to the same time. And in some ways, I'm even leading you slightly astray by putting these things in here. I mean, obviously she doesn't say I'm leading you astray, but if we're, for suspicious readers, you can say, well, why would you talk about this thing that happened after the war, like right after you talk about the war? What's going on? Which I think further, but this kind of information further complicates this idea of where she is in the poem, or what she means to or what her philosophy of memory is, and what she means to be conveying about these specific memories, and what she means to be conveying about this specific point in time. So there's something, it becomes even extra jarring, I would say, to have this first paragraph that's very, Jack is back, to have this first paragraph that's very located in this time and place, and then to kind of move on from there to sometimes like events or things that are not even that are not in the same space or not in the same time. It's quite hard to kind of get a grasp on what she's doing with that, or why she would do that to us. And I think it does become a very provocative poem. I think, to go back to what Caroline said earlier, and that there's and also Jenny, you were saying this as well about like how intense that first stanza is, right? It's like to open your poem with being like yeah, I was a little and they taught me to do the Nazi salute. Like, oh my God, that's horrible. It's a real intense way to start a poem that then takes all kinds of detours through things that don't feel entirely related. A lot of them like fairy tales, right? Into these fairy tale spaces, these fairy tale worlds. Of the 6 or 7 dwarves, which is a coded reference to something that's not even taking place at the same time. And so there's what do we make of the tone? I guess by way of like a sort of final words here, what do we make of the tone of this poem and the way that it kind of treats its very serious subject matter? I don't think it's a frivolous poem at all. I think it's the many detours through kind of fantastical imaginary scenes and the lots of plays on internal rhymes, I think, are actually extremely relevant to what it means to do. I think that it's not trying to just be provocative by being like I rhyme salute and flute or something like that. Mark, did you have something to say?
Yes, I think time doesn't really matter. As she says in the first line, time didn't pass. So she has no real feeling anymore for time, and it doesn't really matter whether this performance with the dwarfs happened later. Time did not pass. Her memory exists in that huge time span. So the first day of school is in the same time span as a long life of learning, and her memories about eating of the tree and the fairy tales and the performance of the dwarfs.
Thanks, Mark. Anybody else? Oh, Suzanne?
Yeah, I just really feel like this is how she accesses. I want to talk about how she accesses this memory, and I think there's one memory that is standing out, and that might be, I'm reading it like that, this very traumatic experience of her mother giving birth. And it could have been a home birth somehow. It's not really clear, but this is what brings this whole thing about, you know. That if she's remembering her childhood, there's this one experience that stands out, and we haven't talked about that yet. And we talked about the first stanza, basically of how many, 6 or 7, 6. And there's 5 more to come, and they're completely elusive at this point,
right.
where we are in the discussion and we're almost at the end. So I would really love to hear what people have to say about that.
I guess that's another good invitation for a sort of final words round of just like, is there a moment that we could have talked that you wish we had talked about in this last hour that we didn't? Because it's true, there's so much to say about just the few parts that we zeroed in on that it's like, my God, you're right, we actually missed most of the poem.
I really find a very strong this. I was 6 or 7 dwarves, and the snow was white, and the prince at war, because it sounds like it's the whole of the poem, which goes like this. It mixes fairy tale and reality, and in her reality at the time, probably there were no fairy tales. It was just a harsh reality.
I think to add to that, I think it's also really interesting that the fairy tales, I mean, I think they were a big part of her childhood, but I think maybe in mentioning them in the poem, she's kind of reclaiming them in a sense, because now she's telling the story, and her childhood probably felt very much like it was controlled by others, it was controlled by all of the things that were going on, the war and the people. And I think by mentioning the fairy tales now in the poem, when she is telling her story in her own words, in her own time, that she can kind of make them her own in a way, because she's not retelling Snow White. She's taking aspects and adding them here and there. 6 or 7 dwarfs, she's not sure. So I kind of think she's reclaiming her childhood in a way by retelling the fairy tales differently.
I think my final word.
Jenny.
Sorry.
No, go Jenny, and then Mary.
I was just going to say, if we were having the final word, mine would be that I've been really interested that other people have provoked me to think in different ways about this poem. And I would be really interested to continue the discussion on your discussion board in ModPo. And I'm wondering if there's anybody else who would be interested in doing that, because in a way, we've just sort of started on it.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a fantastic suggestion. I'm trying to think of a good place to put that thread. I mean, I guess we could talk in the Berlin and Beyond meetup group, but I'm afraid that that's going to start to get like kind of bogged down. So let me just see. I'll create a thread if anybody else wants to chime in. Or yeah, sorry, Mary, you wanted to say something.
No, what somebody else, I can't remember which person, mentioned the poetry of the poem, and I really like this one. And the adult part after the asterisk, she said, "East of expectation, west of still waiting." I think that's a wonderful poetic parallelism, as Mark said, and it's full. East of expectation is when Abel was sent off into the no man's land, the desert, for fugitives, refugees. And then west of still waiting, could that be, she's now in the west as an adult, the adult part. She's in the west and still waiting for what? I think it's a very wonderful poetic combination. That's it. It's fini. That's it.
Did anybody else want to add anything? I'm personally interested in the boy who cried wolf stanza, or the girl who cried wolf. Mother, I cried extremely, and wolf exceeding the snow. I was at home, and wolf pulled over my eyes. Oh, wolf. The boy who did not cry it also died. Twilight overtures. That's geez, it's such a beautiful, puzzling stanza. And I don't like most of this poem. I don't know what to make of it. Other than I think that there's I think that stanza really encapsulates the dynamic that this poem is working with of blending these memories with fables, with the harsh reality of what was happening at the time, and in the ways that it was sensible for her as a child. The boy also died. This kind of rather oblique reference, but in the context of the rest of the poem, I mean, it carries so much weight, right? Of a boy dying, the boy who did the right thing, who did not cry wolf. He also dies, just like the boy who cried wolf. All the boys died. It didn't matter whether they had learned the lesson of the fable of the boy who cried wolf or not. And I think there's something about crying wolf too that this poem is playing with, and it invites. I think the poem invites the reader to cry wolf all of the time, and in some ways it's just what I've done, right? It's kind of like Nazi Germany, there it is, the Holocaust, right? Once again in that line where actually it's not present at all. And so I've kind of become the boy who cried wolf in reading this poem by wanting to be like, okay, you set me up to uncover these references throughout this poem to your childhood, that was in this that took place in this time and place that everybody knows something about. Everybody knows was really bad for lots of people, and so we're sort of set up now to kind of look at that and see that everywhere in the poem. But in some ways, the poem's kind of it's sort of resisting that too, right? It's kind of like it's being like, well, no, this is just a stanza about a boy who cries, wolf. It's just like a little kid. It's not really. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It's complicated, and it plays with you. Any other last comments or two before we wrap up, because we're now well over our time, and this is going to be a huge video to upload. Nancy, were you?
Yeah, I had two things to say. One, I think that what you were talking about, Max, she's also writing about her life and not about politics. These are just her memories. This was just the way it was. It wasn't. I mean, like that. Maybe for her, when she's writing this, maybe the politics are less important. What's important is that she tries to grasp a hold of the way it was, like the way it felt, like the way. And also, I feel like she was older when she wrote the poem, and she might have also, maybe not intentionally, but left in and worked with the fairy tales by way of building a bridge between her young girl and us. We all know those fairy tales, her readers. It might have been an invitation to us to step into her life as a young girl, where we could start to find ourselves somehow in her poem and then begin to understand it. Maybe that's my idea.